Ah, this t-shirt. T-shirt was a bad call. Yeah. Uh, all right. Eyes up here. 1, 2, 3. Eyes on me. Works every time. Always works. How are we doing, guys? All right, take your Bibles to Acts chapter 26. Acts chapter 26. We are going to be fanning. We're going to do a comparison tonight. So we're going to be going through a lot of different passages. So just have your Bibles ready. Be ready to turn the pages. You just closed your paper Bible to pull out your phone Bible?
It's been so long since I used it, I don't remember where anything.
Oh, see, now you can learn. Now you can learn. Okay, so yeah, I was trying to figure out what to do a study on, and one thing about being somebody who likes to preach the Word of God is when you're starting out speaking, you've got two things. Like you got two messages that you just know, because you don't speak. You speak once every 3 years. Like you don't speak often. But then when you start speaking more commonly, you actually do. It becomes a study for yourself. It becomes something that you yourself are learning. And so I really gained a lot of encouragement from this comparison. So we're going to compare really two very large Bible characters and just their different situations and almost like their attitudes. And those Bible characters are going to be the Apostle Paul, a comparison between the Apostle Paul and King Solomon. The Apostle Paul and King Solomon. And we're going to compare their lives and just a few things in their lives and just kind of learn some things from that. So Acts chapter 26, verse 2, the Apostle Paul is making an appeal before King Agrippa. And the Apostle Paul really having no status outside of being a Roman citizen, having no royalty in his veins. He looks before King Agrippa, and in verse 2 he says, I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because I shall answer for myself this day before thee, touching all the things whereof I am accused of the Jews. And if you continue reading on the passage, the Apostle Paul uses this opportunity of persecution in his life to really give the gospel, to give the power of God, and to really open up the king's eyes to the truth. And even at the end of it, the Apostle Paul is like, Festus gets in, and Festus kind of rebukes the Apostle Paul and says, hey, you're wrong, you're a fool, this is bad of you to say. And the Apostle Paul is like, hey, Agrippa, you believe, right? You believe in what I'm saying. And King Agrippa then responds and he says, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. The Apostle Paul is looking before this king and he states, you've almost persuaded me to be a Christian. And this is somebody who's very, very religious and somebody who's very, very, wicked in his ways. And now the Apostle Paul says, I think myself happy. This is nearing the end of his life, nearing the end of the book of Acts. You've got a few more pages, and this is nearing, really, the end of his ministry. And he states, I think myself happy. Now, if we want to see Solomon near the end of his life, does anybody have any idea what book you would go to see Solomon at the latter years of his life? Something outside of the Kings, a book that Solomon has penned himself would be the book of Ecclesiastes. So turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 2. So now we flip roles. So instead of it being the servant to the king, we now see the eyes of a king at the end of his life. The eyes of a king near the end of his life. And in verse 17 of chapter 2, we'll look at verse 12 first. So Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 12. King Solomon pens, and he says, I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king, even that which hath been already done? Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. Then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, that this also is vanity. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever. Seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten. And how dieth the wise man? As the fool. So King Solomon is coming to the conclusion at the end of his life that everybody dies. At the end of your life, you're going to die. It doesn't matter how great and mighty you are. It doesn't matter how poor and unforgettable, or unforgettable, you are. Everybody dies. And the King Solomon is going back over his life and the events of his life. And what does he come to in verse 17? He says, therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. I could have, I would be curious to see the ages between Solomon and Paul, see how close they were in age. But I think the stage of life, they were very similar, kind of in the latter years, kind of reflecting on the past accomplishments, the past struggles in their life, the past tribulations. And now the Apostle Paul states to the king, I am happy. I think myself happy. And King Solomon states, I hated life. I hated life. So it makes you curious, what happened? What's the difference in between these two men? Because both of them, if you study their lives, have heard the voice of God audibly, right? They have both seen God. They have both talked with God and heard his audible voice. And they dwell in different time periods and different dispensations and different states. But you'd think that if one person over the other would be joyful, it would be King Solomon. As far as earthly pleasures go, you'd look at them and go, okay, you guys have different statuses in your life, and yet one is happier than the other. But the one that is happy is the Apostle Paul. And he says he's happy as he's standing before a king who may very, very likely take his life. So 1 Kings chapter 10, we take a look into Solomon's life and see kind of some of the things that he had. And you can study, okay, Solomon was the king of Israel. So all of the glamour, all of the joy, all of the power that comes with that, Solomon possessed. Solomon had untapped wisdom. And truthfully, when you study the Bible, wisdom, I think some of the wisest things, I don't know if anybody's ever heard, you don't know something until you can teach it to a 4-year-old, teach it to a 5-year-old, teach it to a 6-year-old. Miss Pam used to always say that. Pam Drought, missionary to Peru now, she used to always tell me that. Like, you don't know it until you can dumb it down enough for kids to learn it. You don't know it till you can. And there's really a lot of biblical truth to that statement right there. A lot. Because when you read the Proverbs, King Solomon always uses comparisons. God, through the prophets, speaks in similitudes. Jesus Christ comes on the earth and he speaks in parables. People have to speak in ways that they almost dumb things down and give examples and illustrations so that us simple folk can understand what they're saying, right? And that's where the wisdom really comes in, is when you're able to look at King Solomon, somebody so wise, somebody with just, such wisdom that you think, okay, he would speak in such a way that everybody would just, whoa, how can he speak so fancily? And yet Solomon comes and he states things in such a simple way. A very simple way. And that's where wisdom truly is God is able to use his word to teach people and almost dumb it down to where we can understand it. Because we are man, and we in our own wisdom. And that's why God uses foolishness of preaching to be wisdom, because the wisdom of the world is so wicked and it's such folly. But you don't know it until you can teach it. You really don't know it until you can teach it. And that's why I really do enjoy teaching Sunday school, and I really do enjoy learning some things, because there's things I know. There's things, okay, yes, I know this, but I don't think I could display it and teach it to somebody quite yet. And that's like, okay, well, you're not firm enough in that. But King Solomon, in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse number 14, now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 606 talents of gold. 606 talents of gold in 1 year, just 1 year. Now, does anybody know what 603 score and 6 is? That would be 666. 666. Now, if you study the life of Solomon, you see in the beginning of his life, he is a type of Christ. And his ability to bring the nation closer to God, and his ability to just seek after wisdom, long after wisdom. And near the end of his life, he is a type of the Antichrist. One of my great questions in the youth group that I always had and got a lot of different answers from a few people was, I was always like, where did Solomon go when he died? I genuinely asked that question, where did Solomon go when he died? Because if in the beginning of his life he's speaking all these proverbs, he's doing all these wise things, and the end of his life he throws it all the way, I myself believe that he went into Abraham's bosom. I think that in the book of Ecclesiastes he had a repentant spirit, and I believe that he in his life repented of his folly, and God utilized him. But I think that will be something that we'll reveal someday, because I've heard some wise men say that they don't believe he went there, and some wise men say that they do. However, if you look at the 666 talents of gold, I myself didn't do the math, but I found a thing that said, as of 2008, there was a number, so I took 2008 and I added the inflation of what that number would be today. It could be way off or it could be accurate, so we're just going to go with it, but at least it puts it in perspective. That would be $824,720,000 worth of gold in 1 year for this king. That doesn't include the palaces, that doesn't include the livestock, that doesn't include all the wealth he had just in other things. This is just gold that he received in 1 year. This is just gold that came to Solomon in 1 year. This is a guy that is just loaded beyond measure. This guy is just wealthy. He is wealthy. In today's society, that would be almost $1 billion in 1 year, and that's just not including all the other things. That's just 1 year. This guy is wealthy as can be. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Back to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 2 and verse 4, it says the King Solomon, he discusses and displays the works in his life and what he did, what he accomplished. And he says in verse 4, I made me great works. I builded me houses. I planted me vineyards. I made me gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them of all kind of fruits. I made me pools of water, to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. I got me servants and maidens, and had servants born in my house, and I had great possessions of great and small cattle, above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered me also silver and gold, and the peculiar treasure of kings and of the provinces. I gat me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men, as musical instruments, and that of all sorts. So I was great, and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. So, if anybody, maybe you take business math, maybe you take any kind of business classes, or any just kind of accounting, or anything, if you look at somebody that receives almost $1 billion worth of gold with no expenses, they get $1 billion, and this is just gold. Like he said, there was silver, there was cattle, there was livestock, there was servants. He gets $1 billion worth of gold with no expenses. We would call that a profit. We would call that a profit. If you have a, yes? Right, exactly. He had no expenses. He's not paying any money on that money. Like, yeah, you get it. You look at your payments and stuff like that. Like, you get a bonus. Like, I got a bonus, and I was like, okay. I told Darla, I was like, here's what my bonus is going to look like, and she's like, oh yeah. I was like, it could have been higher, but I'll take it. I was like, well, Uncle Sam will take it. But that's what I said, because when you get a bonus, you work overtime. That money just like 40%, 50% taxes. King Solomon, he's not paying any taxes on this money. He's not paying anything. He's not paying a cent. He doesn't have to do any gift write-offs. He doesn't have to give it. This is all him. So, like, if you came in as a business and you went to somebody and were like, hey, here's my business. And they're like, okay, what do you do? Okay, well, we sell sound cancelers. That's what we do. We sell sound cancelers. Riley, right? And they're like, okay, so you cancel sound. Yeah, so how many have you sold? Well, we sold $1 billion worth. Okay, are you profitable? Yeah, we're profitable, $1 billion. There's no expenses. Now, obviously, that would be a phenomenal business model. It's impossible because you have to make it, you have to manufacture it, you have to pay for labor. But this is a guy that makes $1 billion in 1 year, and yet he says there's no profit. There's none. There's no profit. Like okay? How does that happen? You look at this guy who says, anything my heart desired, I got. There's no profit. This is the guy that says, anything I wanted, I went and got. Anything my heart desired, anything my eyes wanted to see, they saw. And this guy then states in a few verses later, I hated life. I hated life. So what happened in his life? What happened in his life? He had great treasures. Well, now let's go back to our other guy, the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter number 11. Corinthians chapter number 11. It's always difficult to teach a standalone lesson, because you have to get it right in the perfect time frame. If you don't have a follow, you have to get all your information out, but you want to make sure you elaborate on it all. Like a sermon, you have it planned, you have your points, boom, boom, boom. But a lesson, like you normally build upon those lessons. You have to get one, you have to make it profitable. It's always a challenge. But 2 Corinthians chapter 11, let's see what the guy, we saw the greatness and the riches and the wealth and the glamour that the guy who hated his life had. Let's see the wonderful life that the guy who thought himself happy has. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, in verse number 23, the Apostle Paul is kind of asking some rhetorical questions. He's kind of comparing himself to these people that they're following religious crowds. And he says, are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. As labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequent, and deaths oft. Of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Okay? So the Apostle Paul is saying, hey, this is what happened to me in my ministry, compared to these guys think they're awesome. You guys are listening to these, but listen what I had to deal with. Of the Jews, 5 times this guy was whipped. 39 stripes. Now, the reason he was whipped 39 stripes, if you look at Deuteronomy chapter 25, I believe, 25. Deuteronomy chapter number 25. So he says 5 times 40 stripes, save one. Because the punishment for the crime that he was theoretically committing was 40 stripes, but no greater than 40 stripes. So Deuteronomy 25, chapter 25, verse 1, says, if there be a controversy between men, which if you study the life of the Apostle Paul, there was very much controversy. He went to the synagogues. He's debating with the Jews. The Jews do reject and hate the things he has to say. Most of the religious Jews. Some of them believed. If there be a controversy between men and they come unto judgment, and the judge may judge them, then they shall justify the righteous and condemn the wicked. And it shall be, if the wicked man be worthy to be beaten, the Apostle Paul did such great, terrible things, giving the gospel of the grace of God today, that it was worthy of him to be beaten. Then the judge shall cause him to lie down and to be beaten before his face according to his fault by a certain number. 40 stripes he may give him and not exceed. Lest if he should exceed and beat him above these with many stripes, then thy brother should seem vile unto thee. So according to Levitical law in the book of Deuteronomy, as they give the law, he says, hey, if somebody's causing controversy and the judge judges him accordingly and says, hey, you can beat this guy, but you cannot beat him greater than 40 stripes. 40 stripes is the maximum. And if you beat him 41 stripes, then it's beyond what you are allowed to do. Then you're vile. Then you have defiled the law. You have broken the law. So now Paul is going to very religious zealots, given the gospel, causing a controversy, and they decide to whip him and beat him. And they beat him, and guess what they do? Because they don't want to break the law, they have a whip, and it has 3 stripes on it. And they beat him 13 times. And that's 39. That's 39 stripes. With the whips that they utilize, they beat him 13 times. And so that gets him 40 stripes, save one, 5 times. That gets him 39 stripes. That is what he is stating there. He's saying, I got whipped because that was the structure of their punishment tools. And so if they whipped him another time, that'd be 42 stripes, and they would be vile, and they would have broken the law. So when the Apostle Paul says, hey, I've been whipped 5 times, 40 stripes, save one. Thrice was I beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. And a night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by mine own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren. Has anybody ever seen the movie Hoodwinked? Nobody, man. That was a movie, an animated movie when I was a kid. And some of you have seen it, but he sings about the horns that he has, you know. He's like, I've got horns open. He has all these different horns to do different purposes. That's like, when I'm reading that, he's like, I've been in peril here, 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 here. Like, he's like, the Jews, you know, I've been in peril by the Jews, but I've also been in peril by the Gentiles. Like, everywhere I go, somebody is trying to kill me. Somebody is trying to get me. And so, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness, beside those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches, who is weak, and I am not weak, who is offended, and I burn not. If I must needs glory, I will glory of the things which concern mine infirmities. The God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, which is blessed forevermore, knoweth that I lie not. In Damascus, the governor under Aretas, the king kept the city of Damascenes with a garrison, desirous to apprehend me. And through a window in a basket was I led down by the wall and escaped his hands. You know, so let's look at the stoning real quick. Acts chapter 14. So this is a guy, like, yeah, no, I'm pretty happy. I'm a pretty happy man. You know, I'm glad to be here in front of you, the king. I'm glad to be able to give the gospel to you, the king. I'm pretty happy. And this is a guy that's been whipped. He's been beaten. He's been stoned. Look at the stoning of the Apostle Paul in chapter 14 of the book of Acts, and verse number 19. Says, and there came thither certain Jews from Antioch and Iconium, who persuaded the people, and having stoned Paul, drew him out of the city, supposing he had been dead. So, like, it's not like, oh, they just threw some rocks at him, and he's like, ow, I got hit by a rock, and he's on the run, maybe got hit in the knee, maybe the shoulder, back of the head. Like, they beat him. Like, they thought he was dead. Like, they effectively stoned him, and they drug him out of the city. They're like, let's get this scum out of our city, because they thought they had killed him. They thought that they had succeeded what they were trying to do. Now, yes?
I was confused about how did I've heard some stories where they threw giant stones at him, but would they have to be higher than him to throw him at?
That is a good question.
I was wondering if maybe they put him like in a dry well, or they dug a hole just for that, and they dropped him on.
I think that a lot of times they kind of disabled the guy. You know, a lot of times there was, like, Stephen, they kind of, like, attacked him, and then they stoned him. So that is a good question. That is something I haven't studied in myself too much, but I'm assuming that, you know, you got enough guys around you that this guy's contained in there, and you just start dropping rocks on the guy. You start dropping rocks. Or, I mean, you also got to remember, like, these are some guys these are some big fellas probably that can they're strong. They're strong. So how they went about it, I'm not 100% confident on. But these big rocks, and maybe it's not just, okay, the big enough rock that you can pick up. Like, we always think, okay, this is the biggest rock. Maybe, okay, it's a medium-sized rock because it's the biggest rock you can pick up and heave. Like, it's not like a little stone. Maybe it's a big rock. You know, you get hit in the head with a shot put ball, it's going to hurt, you know. So that's a good question. But the Apostle Paul is stoned because, I mean, if he gets a giant boulder dropped on his head and they think he's dead, you know, that would probably leave a mark a little bit. But God supernaturally intervenes right here. Now, the Apostle Paul in his ministry, he has a vision of the third heaven, and he goes up to the third heaven. He's able to kind of see it. He's able to see the third heaven. And actually, 2 Corinthians chapter 15 is where he discusses the vision of the third heaven. And a lot of people believe, or some people at least, commentaries believe that at this moment is when he has that kind of vision, is when he's stoned and they're perceiving him to be dead and they're dragging him out. Because when the Apostle Paul's writing about his vision, he doesn't know, he's like, if it was in his body and his whole body went up, or if it was out of his body. And, you know, you can take with that what you will, but that could be true that was when he had a vision. Like I said, I'm not going to die on that hill or even state that that's the fact, but it's something to chew on. But you have two different men in two different states of life in two different positions doing two different things. And at the end of their life, two different outcomes. You have one guy that's beaten, bruised, whipped, thrown in jails. Let's see, Acts chapter 16. Yep, Acts chapter 16. I knew we were missing one. Acts chapter 16 and verse verse 22, the Apostle Paul, it says, and the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates rent off their clothes. Right, Riley? They rent their clothes. They rent off their clothes and commanded to beat them. And when they had laid many stripes upon them, they cast them into prison, charging the jailer to keep them safely, who having received such a charge thrust them into the inner prison and made their feet fast in the stocks. So these guys group up on them, they beat them, they drag them into prison, and they charge the jailer to lock them up, and according to their charge. So they're not just thrown in jail, they're thrown in jail, and in the cell, they're locked up. It's like maximum security. Like, they get these guys out of here. Like, they need additional restraints in the cell that they're thrown into. And instead of being like, wow, this is terrible, what do? In verse 25, and at midnight, Paul and Silas prayed and sang praises unto God, and the prisoners heard him. Paul and Silas, they sing and they praise God. After being beaten, drug into prison, and thrown in these shackles, they sing praises. They sing praises. And so now you've got these two guys at the end of their lives, where one guy, you can look in his life and see the misery and the struggling and the suffering that he had to endure of just his body must have just been so broken and beaten, and God obviously supernaturally intervened, and maybe he offered some relief, but I don't believe there was much offered. I believe that Paul had to carry the scars and the wounds. And when you see the Apostle Paul come to you and say, follow me as I follow Christ, the Apostle Paul followed Christ very, very, very closely to Christ. Outside of the doctrine that he was provided, the Apostle Paul followed Christ. He was beaten by his own countrymen as he came to bring the truth. He was rejected. He was mocked. He was hated. We are like, okay, we want to follow Jesus. That's great. But the example that Paul set for us is very, very excellent. And we can now take the doctrine that he's been given to us. But the Apostle Paul, at the end of his life, after the strugglings and the sufferings and the pain, he says, I'm happy. I feel pretty good. I think myself happy. And King Solomon, the king of Israel, this wealthy, rich man that has all these riches and wonders and glamour, says, I hate life. I hate life. It's all a waste. It's all empty. It's all empty. Two very different takes on life. And, there's the glass half empty, there's the glass half full kind of person, but this isn't an optimist and a pessimist. This is like, okay, you have it all and you're upset and you have nothing and you're happy. What is going on here? What is going on here? Well, look at 1 Kings chapter 11. 1 Kings chapter 11. But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites. So King Solomon loved many strange women. Many strange women. And now why did King Solomon? Because he wanted more. He wanted more. In the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon even, I don't even think I wrote this verse down, he even states that your purpose in life and our part in life is to have one wife, is to enjoy the love of that wife. And this is a guy that has many women because one was not enough and he needed more and he wanted more and he longed for more. And as you look in Ecclesiastes, it's something, anything I wanted, I got because I wanted it. And I wanted it, and I wanted it, and I wanted it. But 1 Kings, if you look at Proverbs chapter 31, in verse 3, give not thy strength unto women, nor thy ways to that which destroyeth kings. So Solomon is something like, hey, don't give your strength to women, plural. Because then later, and this same proverb says, who can find a virtuous woman, singular. I know you guys hate your English classes, and I know you guys hate, sentence, you just breaking down the sentence and stuff like that, and it's super boring. But grammar, coming to the Bible, most people that go to a Bible college, get a Bible degree, have to take every single English class. Because you need to know English to study this Bible. It's important to know English to learn this Bible. And I'm not saying you can't learn stuff if you're not an English scholar. That's not true at all, because God will utilize his word of God. But there's things that I'll hear pastors say, and I'll learn just through the grammatical knowledge that he has, where he'll break down a sentence differently, and I'm like, whoa, that's what he's trying to say. You know? But understand the singularity of the word woman and the plurality of the word women, right? Don't give your strength to women, because they'll destroy you, but who can find a virtuous woman? But the King Solomon, he wanted more, and he wanted more, and he wanted more, and he wanted more. There was never enough to satisfy him. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, in verse 10, Solomon even describes it. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. When goods increased, they are increased that eat them. And what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? So you're saying the more you increase, the more money you make, the more you have. But what good is it if you just look at it? If all you have is, and that's what he's saying, is he's saying, I just wanted more and I wanted more. This is a guy, like I said, he made $1 billion in 1 year, and he still kept making money, and he kept making money, and he kept making money, and it was empty. It was empty. It was all for naught, because he gave his life to women. And he gave his life to something that was not God. Because if you continue down in 1 Kings chapter 11, he gives his life, and they turned his heart to their gods. They turned his heart from his God to their gods. And he turned his heart away because he wanted more. And there was never enough. Oh, that's my fault. Must have been very important. But something was never enough. It was never enough. It was never enough. And he's longing for more, for more, for more. And Ecclesiastes chapter 1, you know, and like I said, and them describing wisdom and using examples and similitudes and analogies to understand and to dumb it down for us, Solomon does that here. He does that here in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Some of the wisest things in the Bible are the easiest, most like duh moments in the Bible. Like Ecclesiastes, when I think it's chapter, I feel like it's 11, but it might not be, where he says, if a tree falls and it lands there, that's where the tree's going to be. Like, wow, that's profound. You may be like, well, that's kind of, well, duh. Yeah, it is duh, but if you do something stupid, you do something stupid, and you did something stupid. Well, no duh, and yet we still go do something stupid, right? That's what he said. Super simple things, and yet very profound. Very deep. But right here in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 7, Solomon writes, all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from whence the rivers come, thither they return again. All things are full of labor. Man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. So he's saying, you're not satisfied. You're longing. You're not satisfied with seeing. Your ear's not satisfied with hearing. And he says the same thing. It's like water just continually going into, like the river's flowing into this water, and yet it's still not full. It will never be full. It's a cycle. It's continuously going and going and going. And Solomon's like, hey, here's the example. Here's the example. Picture water flowing into a lake, because guess what? That water in the lake's always going out of it too. The water that flows into it is always exiting. And there's never enough. It's never full. But then Solomon also, in the book of Proverbs, says something similar about the eyes never being full, never being satisfied in chapter 27. But this one's a little more depressing, you might say. In verse 20, he says, hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. Hell and destruction are never full. You know, people are like, hey, there's room at the cross for you. There's room at the cross for you. There's room at the cross for you. You know, heaven's never full. There's not a max capacity. There's no COVID limits, right? There's room at the cross for you. It's true. There's 100% room at the cross for you. And there's also room in hell for you. Because it's not full. There's room. Vacancy. That's just the truth of the matter. You know, people, they want to dumb down the scripture. They want to dumb down the truth. They want to water it down and make it. But the book of Proverbs makes it very clear that as men's eyes are never satisfied, there's also no room. There's also room in hell. So if you have lost friends or lost family member out there, they're like, whatever, you know. You'd be like, well, hell's not full. It's not maxed out yet. right? But he uses these truths to say, hey, the eyes are always wanting more. They're always longing to see more. I need more. I need more. I want more. In Proverbs chapter 1, it's amazing that the book of Ecclesiastes can be fixed by the book of Proverbs. The book of Ecclesiastes can be fixed by the book of Proverbs. All the suffering, all the heartache, all the pain that King Solomon felt in the book of Ecclesiastes would have all been gone away if he would have followed what he wrote in the book of Proverbs. If he would have followed these things, he's creating a controversy with himself, because he's like, well, this is terrible, and he's not creating controversy. He's affirming what he previously said. He's like, I'll prove it to you. He's like, guess what? If you're greedy of gain, you're going to be miserable. Watch, I'm going to show you. And that's not what he's doing, but that's what he did. It's not what he intentionally set out to do, but that's the end game. That's what happened, because in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 10, he says, my son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. If they say, come with us, let us lay wait for blood, let us lurk privily for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them up alive as the grave, and whole as those that go down into the pit. We shall find all precious substance. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in thy lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird, and they lay wait for their own blood. They lurk privily for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain, which taketh away the life of the owners thereof. So he's speaking of murder and thief and thievery, and theft. He's speaking of just burglars and murders. And he's saying, hey, don't consent now to these guys, because they're going to lay wait and they're going to murder people, and instead they're punishing themselves. They're condemning themselves and the act that they commit. But this is how people that are greedy of gain act. They act wickedly, because they covet, they're envious, and they're greedy, and they're saying, hey, what's yours, I want, and I'm going to kill you for it. King David did the same. He did the very thing to one of his loyal, mighty men, Uriah, because he saw Bathsheba. He wanted that, and so he sent Uriah out to the front lines to be killed, because he was greedy of that gain. And that was something where King David, a man after God's own heart, Goliath slayer, the chosen king, he, in his wisdom, knew that could be the end. That could cut him off from God. And he begged God to forgive him, because he knew what he had committed was so wrong. So these people that are greedy of gain, it wasn't him having money. It wasn't King Solomon having money. Now we understand, Brother Mark has taught you guys enough, and I've sat there enough to know that he's taught you, hey, in the tribulation period, having money is wrong. Right? We've taught that. And then today's period, having money is not wrong. He's taught you guys that enough. So don't go leaving here saying, okay, King Solomon was bad because he had money. Don't say that. It was because he was not satisfied. He was never satisfied. And he was greedy of gain. He was empty. At the end of his life, he looked at all he had, all the wealth, all the riches, all the fame, and it was empty. It was vanity. But the Apostle Paul states in Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3. In verse 4, he says, though I might also have confidence in the flesh, if any other man thinketh that he hath whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more. Circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, and Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, touching the law, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. But what things were gain to me, those I counted lost for Christ. Yea, doubtless, and I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus, my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung, that I may win Christ. So the Apostle Paul states, because King Solomon says all these things that he gained, and then he states, okay, if you're greedy of gain, it's wicked. It's wicked being greedy of gain. And you see in his life, he is just depressed at the end of his life. And he hated his life. And the Apostle Paul states, hey, I was the best Pharisee. I was incredible. I was the best guy according to the law. You know, I could quote the law. I was awesome. I could have probably, he was trained by Gamaliel, a doctor of the law. And he states, all of that is a bunch of garbage. All of that is a bunch of dung, because I count that all for loss. That gained me nothing. I only count the sufferings for gain. The sufferings that he had for Christ is what he counts for gain. For gain. Paul tells us how to receive great gain. To not be greedy of gain, but how to receive great gain in 1 Timothy chapter 6. In verse 6, he says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. You know, when we went on to the fall retreat, Miss Ashley sat and talked to you guys all about contentment. She said, okay, here's how you be content. Right? And this is contentment, because there's bigger things around the corner. But let me tell you, the grass is not greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you put the work into to plant it, to water it, to take care of it, you know. And if it's greener on the other side, it's probably because somebody else planted it and watered it and took care of it. You can't just go to a house that's like, okay, well, I live in Bay City. I work in Bay City. So I live in Bay City. I'm going to move to Midland because the grass is greener there. And then you move to a house that nobody's ever lived into, or hasn't lived in years, and the grass is yellow, and you'd be like, well, why? The grass isn't greener here. Right? If you're not happy now with the little things that you have, you won't be happy once you get the big things that you think will make you happy. If you're not content, you never will be. If you're not content being single, when maybe you graduate high school and you go to college and you're not content being single, you're not content, you feel like God has deprived you of something that you feel you deserve, and you're not content being single, then when you get married, you won't be content with your spouse. If you're not content with the job you have, now that doesn't mean, and understand this, in the market that we live in, and the world that we live in, that you can just be complacent. There's a difference between contentment and complacency, right? You can work to move your way up. But if you're not content serving God in the house that you live in, what do you think is going to make you content serving God in the bigger house that you buy? You know, Darla and I, one of our biggest goals is to be able to have a big house somewhat close to the church with a big yard and a bonfire, so we can have Thursday night teenage bonfires with the youth group. We would love that. I mean, that is a dream of ours. But we don't have that house right now. We don't have that goal achieved right now. So we can sit and go, okay, well, we can wait to serve God until we have that big house. That's when we're going to serve God. Or we can go, okay, Thursday nights in the summer, we're going to the park. We're going to go to the park. If you're not content to serve God in the ministry that he gives you, what makes you think when you're in a greater ministry you're going to be content? If you're not content to serve God with the parents that you have, what makes you think that having different parents would make you content? If you're not content to serve God with the friends that you have, well, ditch them and get better friends. that you do have power over, I'm sorry. But contentment, you know, Miss Ashley, she talked about contentment. It's very important to understand. But being somebody, I'm going on 3 years of marriage to celebrate. And, you know, Darla and I, we have worked hard, and we have budgeted, and we have saved, and we have applied for new jobs, and we've promoted, and we've paid for car repairs, and we've bought new cars, and we've moved around. And one thing that God has taught me is, like, you got to be content. One time I looked at her and said, if our ministry, if our service to God never got anything greater than what it is now, would you be okay with that? And she said, yes. And for me, that was what I needed to hear, because I was okay with that. But we needed to know, because if you're not satisfied with the work you're doing for the Lord, do more, right? If you're like, nope, I feel like if I did something for the Lord right now and Christ came back, I feel like I had left stuff on the table. Well, take it off the table. Go serve God. Change the things you can. And that's a motto we have at the bank. Look at Philippians chapter 4. That's a motto that we have. Change the things you can. You know, we cannot change the market. We cannot change, you know, like the car industry business. Danny, you know your dad, is just killing it, right? Because people have money. But the rates business, People don't want to invest their money in a bank because they're not getting any return, but they'll get a loan from the bank, right? So we can change the things we can change. Change the things you can, and be content with the things you can't, right? Change the things you have power over. If you're not content, like I said, with your friends, and your friends are ungodly, wicked people, you don't have to call them friends. You can call them acquaintances and pray for them. It's true. If you're not content with the parents that you have, you can't change that. You can be content with the attitude that you change. You can change the way you treat them. You can change the way you act. If you're not content with the amount of money you make, you can learn how to budget it. You can go further your education, further your skills, apply for new jobs. But you can't be like, God, why does this person make more money than I do? Well, when I make more money, then I'll serve God. Then I'll serve God. Look at Philippians chapter 4. We're just about done. The King Solomon is empty at the end of his life. He's empty. And because he wanted more, he longed for more, he longed for more. But Philippians chapter 4, verse 10 says, "But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein you were also careful, but ye lacked opportunity. Now that I speak in respect of, not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things I am instructed, both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. Notwithstanding, ye have well done, that ye did communicate with my affliction. Now ye Philippians know also, that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church communicated with me as concerning giving and receiving, but ye only. For even in Thessalonica ye sent once and again unto my necessity, not because I desire a gift, but I desire fruit that may abound to your account. But I have all and abound. I am full, having received of Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, an odor of a sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God." You know, the Apostle Paul, he's somebody that the structure I think that would be the easiest to grasp is local church supporting missionaries. Like, he had churches sending him money to be on the mission field. But this is something, he didn't have churches all over the United States in a free nation where he could just go to congregations of 400 to 500 people and get support and then wait till he had enough support to go share the gospel. Now, this is somebody who knew how to be poor. He knew how to be poor. He knew how to be hungry. He knew how to be cold. He knew how to be without a house. And he knew how to then have those things. And one thing that I have learned, and I've never, I would never even be able to call myself poor. I've never really wanted for anything. Now, that doesn't mean growing up, we never had a lot of money, but I never wanted for anything. There were people that had less than I did. There are people that did want for some things. I myself never, I had food, I had clothes, I had transportation. I was able to live a good life. So I myself never wanted for anything. But starting out, Darla and I, we worked hard, we budgeted money. We never had an abundance, but we were able to work and we were able to have that. And looking back on this 3 years, and we can see maybe some of the things that we have now that we would never dreamed of having in the beginning of our marriage. We appreciate it more now because we know what it was like then. We know what it was like then. Like, we know what it was like to go to dinner and somebody treat you to dinner and be like, man, I wish I could treat somebody to dinner someday. We penny pinch. We can't treat somebody to dinner. We can't do that. And then be like, you know what, I'm going to treat somebody to dinner right now because I just want to do it. I want to be nice. We know what it's like to hear about these gifts that people give to these missionaries or to somebody in need and to be like, man, I wish I could make money so I could give somebody that kind of money. I wish I could have that kind of time. And then you get there, you work and you budget and you pray and God blesses you. I'm telling you, God blesses you. And you're able to do something like that. And you're like, man, I never ever thought we would make it. And you appreciate it so much more. You appreciate it so much more. You're like, wow. Now, I'm not saying, like, if you guys start off and you don't move out of your parents' house until you have a really nice degree and you just make money right off the bat, appreciate that. Love it. I'm not saying don't, okay, I got to be poor for a little bit. I got to penny pinch. Like, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is be content with what you have. Be content with what you have. If you start off, if you get an engineering degree, or if you get a doctorate, if you have parents that are like, you know what, you can live here rent free until you graduate college, and you graduate college debt free, and you go off making money, and you just start making money, and you never have to worry about money. But that's the thing, contentment's greater than money. I'm just using that as an example. Because Paul knew how to be content in all the pains, the stripes, the strugglings, the sufferings that he dealt with. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, and then we'll be done. I think contentment is something that teenagers, and that me as a teenager, I wish it was beaten into my head. Because, for example, you graduate, or you move out of your parents' house, and there's certain things that you're used to being there that aren't there anymore. And I'm just going to do it as a simple, like maybe a certain measuring spoon you loved. And then you move out of the house, and that measuring spoon is your mama's, and you can't take that measuring spoon with you, right? There's certain pots and pans that you're like, okay, you just grow up because your parents have been married for 25 years. They've just compiled all this junk, right? They don't need all this junk. And then you get there, and you move out, and you ain't got none of it, and you're like, oh, wait, what do you mean we don't have that? Everybody has that. No, you don't have that. You don't have that. Right? Now, so that's a simple, funny, comical thing. But moving out of your parents' house, guess what? That loving love of your mom and dad always being there and at the house that you have, that's gone. Now, your mom and dad will still always be there. They'll still be there, I hope, if you have good parents. If you don't, be content with it. I'm sorry. Right? But, there's things that change when you move out. There's things that you cannot stand right now because you just want the independence and you want the freedom. And you won't be able to be a good kid. You're like, okay, I can't be a good kid because I want my independence. And then you have the independence and you can't be a good adult because you didn't know how to be a good kid. Because you weren't content. You always wanted more. You always wanted something more. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 14. If in the day of prosperity be joyful, but in the day of adversity consider. God also hath set the one over against the other, to the one that man should find nothing after him. If Solomon would have grasped that in the beginning of his life, I think his life and his final book and the end of his years would be a lot different. If he would have said, outside of God, there's nothing. Rejoice when things are good. Consider when things are bad. But look at God. Look at God. Love God. But I urge you, I beseech you, to be content. To be content. Because a lot of people, they look at teenagers and they look at kids and they maybe use the word spoiled, right? And sometimes people call people spoiled. And it's like, I ain't never had a dollar or a dime to my name. What do you mean spoiled, right? But be content with the circumstances and the life that God has granted you, and the gifts and the talents and the looks and the abilities, that God has blessed you with. Because at the end of your life, you won't regret it. Because if you're always looking for something more to make you happy, and looking and longing for something more to make you happy, to make you satisfied, to make you full, you're going to end up at the end of your life hating it. No matter your circumstances, you're going to hate it. But if you're looking at God to fill you, and you're content with what he gives you, and you work through what he allows you to work through, and you follow him, you follow his guidance, you're wise, you're a good steward, you're a good servant, you sacrifice, no matter the stuff and the trials and the tribulations that you fight through, at the end of your life, you'll say, I'm doing all right. Feeling pretty good. So let's pray. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, we thank you for the time you've given us. We thank you for the examples in the Bible that you've set before us, Lord. I pray that we can just not let them fall on empty ears and our closed ears, Lord, and hardened hearts, Lord. I pray that we can just be content. I know myself, I ought to be content with what you give me, Lord, and I pray that we can just sacrifice our lives and our hearts and our talents to you, Lord. In your name I pray.